The suitcase sat by the door like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I hadn't finished reading. Navy blue, expensive. Something she'd bought 3 months ago when things were already shifting beneath us, though I hadn't noticed yet. Or maybe I had, and I'd simply chosen to believe in momentum, in the gravity of 4 years together. My coffee was going cold on the kitchen counter, half drunk. The foam art I'd made her already dissolving into meaningless swirls. "I need more," Vanessa said, not looking at me. She was looking at her phone, then at her watch, then at the window where late autumn light cut through our living room in amber slices. "I need someone who can give me the life I want, Marcus. You understand, don't you?" I understood that she was speaking to me the way you'd explain a necessary decision to someone reasonable, calm, almost apologetic, but final. I understood that she'd rehearsed this. I understood that outside, idling in a black Mercedes I could see through our second-floor window, someone was waiting with the engine running and his patience wearing thin. "How long?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. She had the decency to flinch. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." 2 months. She picked up the suitcase handle. "He owns the marketing firm that handled our Q3 campaign. Julian. He's established, secure. He can offer me things you can't, and I'm tired of pretending that doesn't matter to me. Julian." Even his name sounded like money, old, inherited, untouchable. I looked at Vanessa then, really looked at her, trying to memorize the architecture of her face. The slight asymmetry of her eyebrows, the small scar above her lip from a childhood accident she told me about on our 3rd date. I was searching for the woman I'd loved, the one who'd said she wanted to build something real, not something shiny. But she was already gone, replaced by someone who checked her watch while ending us. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, and I meant it, not out of kindness, but out of curiosity, the same way you watch a ship sail toward a storm, wondering if the captain knows what's coming. She paused at the door, her hand on the frame. For a moment I thought she might say something else, something that would make this mean what it once would have meant. But she just nodded, a small efficient gesture, and left. I heard her heels on the stairs, heard the car door close, heard the Mercedes pull away with that particular purr that expensive engines make. Quiet, controlled, confident. I sat down on the couch and stared at the ring of water her coffee mug had left on the table. Then I picked up my phone and deleted her number. "One day you'll remember who you left behind. But I won't be there to answer." The first week moved like footage played at the wrong speed. Too slow, then suddenly too fast, then slow again. I went to work. I came home. I ordered takeout and ate it standing at the counter because sitting at the table felt like performing a ritual for an audience that no longer existed. My coworkers noticed the way people notice things they don't want to ask about. Careful glances, overly casual questions about my weekend. I gave them nothing to work with. At night, I'd lie in bed and trace the ceiling cracks with my eyes, mapping constellations in plaster imperfections. The grief came in waves, but I refused to let it drown me. I watched it the way you'd watch weather through a window, present, observable, but separate. She had made a calculation. She had looked at my bank account, my 10-year-old car, my modest apartment with its second-hand furniture, and decided the math didn't work. There was a clarity in that, brutal but clean. By the second week, something shifted. I started waking up at 5:30 instead of hitting snooze until 7. I'd go for a run while the city was still gray and quiet, my breath visible in the cold air. My thoughts finally finding a rhythm that didn't circle back to her. I remembered something my father had told me once. Pain is just energy with nowhere to go. Give it direction and it becomes something else. I gave it direction. I enrolled in 2 online courses, Advanced Data Analytics and Strategic Project Management. Things I'd been putting off because she'd wanted me home by 6 for dinner parties with her colleagues. Events where I'd smile and nod while her friends compared vacation homes. I cleaned out my closet and donated half of it. I replaced my cheap coffee maker with a proper espresso machine and learned to pull shots that didn't taste like regret. Small things. Deliberate things. At work, I volunteered for the project everyone else avoided. A failing account with a difficult client who'd already burned through 3 project managers. I studied their business model until I understood it better than they did. I showed up to meetings with solutions instead of excuses. Within a month, I turned it around. My supervisor noticed. Others noticed. I started seeing what Vanessa and Julian never had. That reliability wasn't boring, it was rare. That competence wasn't a consolation prize, it was currency. That the qualities she dismissed as insufficient were exactly what made people call me when things fell apart. 3 months in, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone different. Leaner, sharper, quiet in a way that suggested depth rather than absence. I realized then that my strength was no longer emotional, it was strategic. 6 months after Vanessa left, I was offered a senior position at a competing firm. One with better resources, better clients, and a reputation for solving problems others couldn't. The salary was nearly double what I'd been making. I accepted without hesitation and gave my 2 weeks' notice the same afternoon. My new role put me in rooms where decisions worth millions were made over coffee that cost more than my old weekly grocery bill. I listened more than I spoke. I watched how power moved through conversations, how the truly successful people never raised their voices, never made threats. They simply became indispensable. I took notes. Within 3 months, I'd rebuilt a failing division by doing something revolutionary, actually listening to what the clients needed instead of selling them what we wanted to move. My reputation grew quietly but steadily. Industry publications started featuring my projects. Colleagues who'd ignored me before suddenly wanted lunch meetings. I accepted some, declined others. Scarcity, I'd learned, created value. I joined a professional networking group that met Tuesday evenings at a downtown hotel. Entrepreneurs, investors, consultants, people who understood that wealth wasn't about what you spent, but what you built. I absorbed their strategies, their language, their way of seeing opportunities where others saw obstacles. One of them, an older woman named Patricia who'd built 3 successful startups, took an interest in mentoring me. "You have something rare," she told me over whiskey one evening. "You know how to wait." By month 8, I'd started my own consultancy on the side. Nothing flashy, just strategic project recovery for companies in crisis. I took on 2 clients initially, both referrals from Patricia's network. I worked nights and weekends, treating each engagement like surgery. Precise, methodical, no wasted motion. Both clients recovered. Both recommended me to others. The money started coming in. Not Julian's inherited fortune, not the kind of wealth that arrived in trust funds and stock portfolios, but earned money, the kind that came from solving problems people thought were unsolvable. I upgraded my apartment, bought a reliable car, invested the rest. I learned that real security wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about never being desperate again. I heard things occasionally, through mutual acquaintances, through the invisible network that connects everyone in a mid-sized city. Vanessa had quit her job. Julian didn't want her working, apparently. She'd become a fixture at charity galas and country club events, photographed in designer dresses, smiling the smile of someone playing a role. Julian's business was expanding aggressively, leveraging debt for rapid growth. Some people called it ambitious. Others called it reckless. I filed the information away and focused on my own path. By month 10, my consultancy had 6 active clients and a waiting list. I hired an assistant, rented a small office downtown with windows that overlooked the financial district. I kept the space minimal. Clean desk, quality chairs, nothing that screamed success but everything that whispered competence. Clients felt safe there. They told me things they wouldn't tell their boards, their partners, their lawyers. I became the person people called when everything else had failed. Patricia invited me to speak on a panel about strategic recovery at an industry conference. 200 people in attendance, including journalists, investors, and executives from firms I'd once dreamed of working for. I spoke for 12 minutes about the architecture of failure and how to rebuild from it. I didn't mention Vanessa, didn't mention betrayal, didn't mention the coffee that had gone cold that autumn morning. But everything I said was built on that foundation. The applause was polite, professional. 3 people offered me their cards afterward. One of them represented a firm that would later become my largest client. I walked out of that conference center into the cool evening air and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but its more durable cousin. Satisfaction. The kind that didn't depend on anyone else's validation. I'd stopped thinking about revenge somewhere along the way. Revenge required her to still matter, required me to still be measuring my worth against her choices. But I'd moved past measurement into simple momentum. I was building something that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with who I'd decided to become. The first crack in Julian's empire appeared in the financial press 14 months after Vanessa had left. I was having breakfast at my usual cafe, reading the morning news on my tablet, when I saw the headline, Castellan Holdings faces SEC inquiry over acquisition practices. The article was careful, diplomatic, using phrases like accounting irregularities and questions about disclosure. But I'd been in enough boardrooms by then to read between the lines. Julian's aggressive expansion had caught the wrong kind of attention. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no schadenfreude. It was like reading about a storm system forming over an ocean I'd already crossed. Over the following weeks, more stories emerged. Julian's marketing firm, the one where he'd met Vanessa, had been heavily leveraged to fund his other ventures. He'd been using success in one area to mask failures in another, a shell game that worked until someone started looking closely. Investors were asking questions. Partners were distancing themselves. The SEC inquiry expanded. I heard about it in fragments, the way you hear about a former neighbor's troubles, through mutual acquaintances who didn't realize they were connecting dots I'd already mapped. A former colleague mentioned at a networking event that Julian's firm had lost 3 major accounts in 1 month. Patricia forwarded me an industry newsletter that mentioned Castellan Holdings' stock price dropping 30% in 2 weeks. I nodded, filed it away, and returned to my own work. My consultancy had grown to the point where I needed to make a decision, keep it as a side venture or commit fully. I chose commitment. I gave notice at my firm, hired 2 associate consultants, and leased a larger office space. The risk was calculated. My reputation could sustain it. Within a month, I had more client inquiries than I could handle. I was in that new office, reviewing a proposal, when my assistant knocked on the glass door. Someone named Vanessa Palmer called. She didn't leave a message, but she said it was important. She left a callback number. I looked at the pink message slip in her hand. Palmer. She'd taken his name then. I wondered if there'd been a wedding or if she'd just assumed the identity like putting on a coat. Thank you, I said, taking the slip. No need to return it. My assistant nodded and left. I looked at the phone number, a different one from the one I'd deleted over a year ago, and felt the same distant curiosity I'd felt reading about Julian's troubles. What could possibly be important enough to break a 14-month silence? I threw the message slip in the recycling bin and went back to my proposal. She called again 3 days later, then again the following week. Each time my assistant took a message and each time I declined to return it. On the 4th call, Vanessa left a voicemail on my direct line. She must have gotten the number from someone we both knew. Her voice was different, smaller somehow. Marcus, it's me. I know I don't have any right to ask, but I really need to talk to you. It's about a situation Julian and I are facing. Please, just 10 minutes. I'll come to you. I listened to it once, then deleted it. 2 weeks later, another call came. This time not from Vanessa but from a name I recognized from the news. One of Julian's former business partners, someone whose desperation must have been profound to reach out to a consultant he'd never met. He explained that Castellan Holdings was in serious trouble, that they needed someone with my specific expertise in crisis management and strategic recovery. He mentioned my fee wouldn't be an issue. He mentioned that this was time-sensitive. He mentioned that Vanessa had recommended me. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the city below, at the gridwork of streets and buildings, at the late afternoon sun turning everything amber and gold. I thought about the suitcase by the door, the cooling coffee, the careful calculation in her voice when she'd explained why I wasn't enough. I'll need to review the situation before committing, I told him. Send me everything, financials, legal documents, the full picture. I'll let you know by end of week if I'm taking this on. Thank you, he said, and I could hear the relief flooding through the phone. Thank you so much. I hung up and sat in the silence of my office, watching the light change. I reviewed the documents for 3 days. Spreadsheets that told stories of ambition outpacing wisdom, contracts signed in confidence that now read like confessions, email chains where warning signs had been dismissed with the kind of arrogance that mistake momentum for invincibility. Julian's empire hadn't collapsed. It had been collapsing for months, maybe longer, held together by loans against loans, promises leveraged into more promises, a tower built on credit and bravado. The SEC inquiry was just the visible wound. Underneath were infections that went deeper. Clients threatening litigation, vendors demanding payment, key employees quietly updating their resumes. Someone had tried to manage it all with silence and misdirection, believing they could simply outrun the consequences. That someone, I gathered from the organizational charts, had been Julian himself. I could fix it. Not easily, but I could. It would require brutal honesty, strategic sacrifices, and a complete restructuring of how Castellan Holdings operated. It would require someone willing to make decisions that prioritized survival over ego. I'd done it before for companies in worse shape. On Thursday evening, I called the business partner back. "I'll take the engagement," I said, "but I need complete operational authority for 90 days. No interference, no second-guessing. If Mr. Castellan can't agree to that, we're wasting each other's time." There was a pause. "He'll agree. We don't have other options." "Then let's meet Monday, 10 a.m. I'll need everyone in leadership present." "Including Vanessa?" "She's involved in several aspects of the business." Of course she was. "Everyone," I repeated. The meeting was held in a conference room that tried too hard. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that could seat 20, abstract art that cost more than most people's cars. I arrived 15 minutes early with my associate Emma, a sharp woman in her 30s who'd worked in corporate restructuring for a decade. We set up our materials in silence, organizing documents with the efficiency of surgeons preparing instruments. They arrived in a cluster. 5 people, all wearing expressions somewhere between hope and dread. Julian came in first, and I recognized him from the photos I'd seen, though he looked diminished somehow, his expensive suit hanging differently than it had in those charity gala pictures. His confidence had been replaced by something brittle, something that might shatter if touched wrong. Then Vanessa. She'd cut her hair shorter. She wore a navy dress that probably cost what I used to make in a week, paired with jewelry that caught the morning light. But her eyes had the hollow quality of someone who'd stopped sleeping well. She saw me and froze for just a fraction of a second, her hand tightening on the leather portfolio she carried. "Marcus," she said quietly. "Ms. Palmer," I replied, gesturing to the seats. "Please, let's begin. We have a lot to cover." I watched Julian register the distance in my tone, the professional formality where familiarity might have been. He looked at Vanessa, then at me, and I saw him putting pieces together he probably should have assembled months ago. I spent the next hour laying out the situation with surgical precision. The numbers, the legal exposure, the timeline of decisions that had led here. I didn't soften it. They needed to understand how close they were to complete failure, not the kind where you lose money, but the kind where you lose everything and face potential criminal liability. Julian interrupted twice, trying to explain or justify. I let him finish, then continued as if he hadn't spoken. By the third time, he stayed quiet. "The path forward requires 3 things," I said, pulling up a slide Emma had prepared. "First, immediate asset liquidation. The properties in Aspen and Monaco, the boat, the art collection, everything non-essential converts to capital. Second, complete transparency with the SEC and affected parties. We negotiate settlements from a position of honesty, not evasion. Third, Julian steps back from operational decisions entirely. Someone with clean hands runs this company while we rebuild trust." "That's not," Julian started. "Those are the terms," I said, meeting his eyes. "You hired me for my expertise. This is it. You can accept these conditions and have a chance at survival, or you can decline and face what comes next alone. Your choice." The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below. I could feel Vanessa staring at me, but I kept my focus on Julian, watching him wrestle with what it cost to need help from someone he'd never considered worth knowing. "How long?" he finally asked, his voice rough. "To stabilize? For months if we're lucky. To actually recover? 2 years minimum, and that's with perfect execution." He looked at Vanessa, who hadn't spoken since we'd started. She nodded slightly, and I saw something pass between them, not love, but the desperate solidarity of people in a sinking boat. "All right," Julian said. "We'll do it your way." I stood and began packing my materials. Emma will send over the contracts this afternoon. We start Friday. I'll need complete financial access by tomorrow end of day. I paused at the door and looked back at them. These two people who'd once seemed so untouchable, so certain of their choices. One more thing. This works only if you're both completely honest with me about everything. Every mistake, every hidden problem. I can fix most things, but I can't fix what I don't know about. Julian nodded. Vanessa's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears, but I didn't wait to find out. Emma and I walked out into the corridor, our footsteps echoing on marble floors. That was cold, Emma said once we were in the elevator. That was professional, I corrected. It took 93 days to stabilize Castellan Holdings. 93 days of conference calls and emergency meetings, of negotiating with creditors and regulators, of making decisions that salvaged what could be saved and amputating what couldn't. Julian signed everything I put in front of him with the mechanical compliance of someone who'd learned that his instincts couldn't be trusted. Vanessa attended most meetings, taking notes, asking occasional questions that showed she'd been paying more attention to the business than I'd expected. I was professional, distant but not cruel. I did exactly what they'd hired me to do. On the final day of my contract, I delivered a presentation to the restructured board showing stabilized cash flow, settled legal issues, and a realistic 18-month plan for growth. They applauded. Julian shook my hand and said something about how they couldn't have survived without me. I nodded, accepted the final payment, and packed my briefcase. Vanessa caught me in the parking garage as I was unlocking my car. Marcus, wait. She was slightly out of breath, her heels clicking against concrete as she approached. Please, just a minute. I turned, keys in hand, and waited. I need to say this, she began, then stopped, searching for words she'd probably rehearsed. I was wrong. About everything. About what mattered. About what I needed. About... Her voice cracked slightly. About you. I threw away something real for something that looked impressive, and I've spent every day since realizing what I lost. I looked at her, really looked at her, the way you'd examine a photograph from years ago, recognizing the features but not quite connecting them to anything present. You didn't lose anything, Vanessa, I said quietly. You made a choice. Choices have consequences. That's not tragedy. That's just math. Is there any chance? She started. No, I said, not unkindly. There isn't. Not because I'm angry or because I'm punishing you, but because I'm not the same person you left, and you're not the person I loved. We're strangers who happen to share a history. She nodded slowly, tears finally spilling over. I hope you find someone who deserves you. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said, echoing the words I'd spoken that autumn morning. This time I meant them differently, not as curiosity but as genuine release. I drove home through evening traffic, windows down, letting the spring air wash through the car. I felt light, not euphoric, not vindicated, just free. Free from the weight of anger I'd never quite carried. Free from a story that had already ended long before today. At home, I made dinner, pasta with vegetables, nothing fancy, and ate it at my table while reading a book Patricia had recommended. Afterwards, I stood at my window watching the city lights flicker on, block by block, like stars emerging from daylight. My apartment was quiet but not empty, clean but lived in. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Heard you wrapped the Castellan project. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate? I smiled and typed back. Perfect. I'll buy the first round. 3 months later, I passed by the street where Vanessa and I had lived together. I was meeting a client nearby and the route took me past our old building. I glanced up at the second-floor window, saw someone else's curtains, someone else's life playing out in rooms I'd once known by heart. I kept walking,